transcranial, so it's across the cranium or the skull, and it's non-invasive. So we're not opening up the skull, we're not doing a surgery, we're not putting a pacemaker in the chest or in the skull or anything like that. And so we're using a high-powered magnet to induce a small electrical current in the outer part of the brain.
So how does TMS differ from traditional mental health treatments like medication or talk therapy?
So I just go back to the name, TMS, transcranial. So it's across the cranium or the skull, and it's non-invasive. So we're not opening up the skull, we're not doing a surgery, we're not putting a pacemaker in the chest or in the skull or anything like that. And so we're using a high-powered magnet to induce a small electrical current in the outer part of the brain, the cortex. So transcranial magnetic, the magnet is actually inducing the E field into the cortex stimulation. Really straightforward. It's taken centuries, of course, for this to develop, and initially pioneered in the 1980s by Mark George, Alvaro Pascal-Leon, who was a neurologist, and Dr. George was out of MUSC. And they really focused on this ring coil which was their first generation coil. Then we used a figure of 8 coil, and there were some initial studies in depression done, and they focused this coil on the front part of the brain because patients who had strokes had higher rates of depression. When patients have strokes in the front part of the brain, particularly in the left front part of the brain, depression rates are really high. And so noting this neurologist, Alvaro Pascal-Leon, and then Mark George, who's both a neurologist and a psychiatrist, they did some of the early studies using these interesting shaped coils, a figure of 8 coil, and magnetizing and using electromagnetic energy to stimulate the front part of the brain. Brainsway developed their technology in conjunction with the NIH, and their coils are what are called complex coils. So they're complex coils, and particularly the H1 coil, which is FDA approved, goes deeper and broader than the figure of 8. So it's a 3rd generation coil. And for depression, it actually stimulates bilaterally both sides of the brain, left greater than right, of the frontal cortex. So the front part of the brain, just at the forehead, is where we focus this H1 coil. And what we've shown in multiple research studies is that after about 30 to 40 sessions, about 80% of people with depression have a phenomenal result. So 8 out of 10 patients will have a clinically significant change in their depression score. And about 50
that's been our experience as well.
And this has been shown in small studies, large studies, and in large data sets. And then, of course, in community health centers like yours as well.
So it seems like, there's we're on the 3rd generation right now with Brainsway.
So each one you could say is a 3rd generation coil.
And so I would imagine that pre-generation 1, maybe it was harder to get the coil on the right spot. And now it seems like it's pretty easy to make sure that the coil is on the right spot.
So part of the different versions, and particularly the H coils that Brainsway make, part of what I like about them is that they're flexible and they're not rigid. And we encase them in a helmet. It's kind of like a 1950s hairdryer. It kind of looks like. And we put that helmet down on the patient's head,
To get a free copy of the 12-step guide that I created for you, click on the link in the description below.
And we can snug it up. So the coil is so flexible that it fits really nicely and it won't bounce off. And so this is really helpful. A lot of the other coil designs don't have this feature. And so you actually have a lot of missed targets. And that's what I like about the BrainsWay system. And I've used all the systems, and again, all the systems have FDA clearance, FDA approval. But there's are some features that I really appreciate about the BrainsWay system. Right. In addition to the H1 coil, there's actually 2 additional shaped coils, the H7 and the H4. And just to give a little more color to this, there's 3 brain networks which are basically responsible for 80% of our mental health and addiction conditions. So 3 brain networks, and wow, BrainsWay has 3 different helmets. Right. And each helmet modulates a different network. So we'll get into a little more about that this evening. Right. But that just gives you a broad basis of what differentiates BrainsWay and in terms of its treatments and its broad-based neuroscience platform.
Now, in the future, I thought I heard somebody talk about this. Are you guys developing a coil that could be all 3 coils in ones, to where you can just use a different part of the... So
there is going to be... so the coil development will broaden, meaning there is going to be a next generation coil. We're in discussions about when that will launch. But yes, we do. There is some research with our multi-channel coil. Right. And basically the magnetic field rotates, and this produces a higher density of E field. And so you can imagine that. So we've done some basic research with this, but we next phase is to do some clinical studies to make sure that there's clinical efficacy. Right. So
as I'm thinking about shampoo and conditioner, like can't really do shampoo and conditioner in one. Right. They've done it, but it doesn't really work. And so is that the same thing here, where you can't really do, you could try, but it's probably not really.
It depends on the brain though. And it depends, a guy like me with hairdo, the hair that I have, if you're showing this, if you're viewing this, I am follicularly challenged. But it's basically the magnetic fields and the E fields overlap. And this stimulates a higher density because perpendicular to the E field, you get neurons discharging. Now, the wonderful thing about TMS is it actually is incredibly safe, and it's pretty much good for all of our brains. Right. In other words, when you do repetitive sessions of TMS, you're invariably inducing neuroplasticity. It's a neuroplastic tool, if you will. Right. And there are not systemic side effects. It's so safe, it's actually safer than Tylenol.
If you got value from this video, if you heard what you needed to hear, be sure to like it. Comment if you've got a question or you have something to say. Subscribe to the channel. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So if you or a loved one is struggling and you need some guidance and you need some direction, reach out to us. Our contact information is down below, or you can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, whether it be detox, inpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services, whatever it may be. Like I said, we can either help you or make sure that you get sent in the right direction. We help people all over the country, all over the world for that matter. I'll see you on the next video.